The first crack in my marriage appeared on a Tuesday afternoon in late September, though I wouldn't recognize it as such until months later. I was standing in our kitchen, with its butcher block counters I'd refinished myself, and the herb garden flourishing on the windowsill, when Marcus walked in with that particular expression I'd come to know over 23 years of marriage. The one that meant he had something to say but was calculating the safest way to say it. "Diane," he began, setting his briefcase down with unusual care. "We need to talk." 5 words. That's all it took to shift the axis of my world. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, turned down the heat under the pot of soup I'd been stirring, and faced my husband. He was 51, still handsome in that distinguished way that men often become as they age, silver threading through his dark hair, lines around his eyes that I'd once found attractive. Now, those eyes wouldn't quite meet mine. "I've met someone," he said. "Not 'I'm unhappy,' or 'we have problems,' or even 'I've made a terrible mistake.' Just, 'I've met someone,' as if he'd stumbled across a fascinating new restaurant or a compelling television series. The soup continued to bubble behind me, filling the silence with a cheerful sound that felt obscene given the moment. I remember thinking, absurdly, that I should turn it off completely, that I should do something with my hands. Instead, I stood there, the dish towel still clutched between my fingers, and asked the question I already knew the answer to. "How long?" 6 months. He had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Her name is Amber. She works at the firm. In marketing." Amber. Of course her name was Amber. Of course she worked at his law firm, probably walking past his office every day with her youth and her unlined face, and her future still spread out before her like an uncharted map. "How old is she?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. "Does that matter?" "How old, Marcus?" 28. I actually laughed, a short, sharp sound that seemed to startle us both. 28. When Marcus and I met, I'd been 28. That was the year we bought our first house together. A tiny 2-bedroom starter home we'd sold years ago when his practice took off. I'd been pregnant with our son by 29. Our daughter had followed 2 years later. "What about Daniel and Rachel?" I asked. "They're adults now. They'll understand." But he was wrong about that, as he was wrong about so many things. Our children were 22 and 20, old enough to be considered adults by legal standards, but still young enough to need the foundation of their parents' marriage beneath them. Still young enough to have their understanding of love and commitment shaped by what they saw us do next. "I want a divorce," Marcus said. And there it was, the real reason for this conversation. Not to confess or apologize or try to repair what he'd broken, but to expedite his exit. "I'll be fair about everything. The house, the assets. I'm not trying to hurt you, Diane." I looked at him then, really looked at him, and saw a stranger wearing my husband's face. This man who had promised me forever on a bright June day 23 years ago, who had held my hand through 2 difficult labors, who had cried with me when his mother died, and laughed with me through 1,000 ordinary moments that made up a life. This man was leaving me for a woman young enough to be his daughter, and he wanted me to believe he wasn't trying to hurt me. "Get out," I said quietly. "Diane, get out of my house. It's my house too. Legally. I don't care about legally right now. I care about the fact that if you don't leave in the next 30 seconds, I'm going to throw this pot of soup at your head, and then we'll see how understanding everyone is." He left. I heard him climb the stairs to our bedroom. Our bedroom heard drawers opening and closing, the sound of the suitcase wheels on hardwood floors. 20 minutes later, the front door closed behind him, with a finality that echoed through every room of the house we'd built together. I turned off the soup. Then I walked upstairs to our bedroom and lay down on his side of the bed, pressing my face into his pillow, breathing in the scent of his cologne. And for the first time in my adult life, I felt truly, devastatingly alone. The divorce proceedings began with surprising swiftness. Marcus hired Gerald Hoffman, a partner at a different firm known for his aggressive representation in family law cases. I hired Patricia Lim, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, who listened to my story with a sympathetic but pragmatic expression. "The house is going to be the main issue," Patricia told me during our second meeting. "It's your primary marital asset, worth about $850,000 in the current market." $850,000. We'd bought it 15 years ago for $300,000. Back when the neighborhood was still up and coming, I'd spent countless hours making it ours. Stripping wallpaper, refinishing floors, painting every room, planting the garden that now bloomed reliably every spring. Marcus had paid the mortgage, yes. But I had made it a home. "I'm not leaving," I told Patricia. "He's the one who wants out. He can find somewhere else to live. It's not that simple. In a divorce, assets are divided equitably. He has a claim to the house, whether he lives in it or not. So what are my options?" Patricia leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled. "You could buy him out, pay him half the equity. That would be roughly $425,000. Or you sell the house and split the proceeds, or one of you could refinance and take sole ownership, compensating the other through different assets or spousal support arrangements. $425,000. I didn't have that kind of money. I'd been a stay-at-home mother for most of our marriage, only returning to work part-time as a freelance graphic designer 5 years ago when Rachel entered high school. My income was decent, but nowhere near enough to secure that kind of financing on my own. "He wants me to sell," I said. "He told me last week. He said it would be cleaner, easier for everyone. Easier for him, perhaps." Patricia's expression hardened slightly. "He wants the money to start his new life. And I'm going to guess his new girlfriend has some opinions about where that money should go." She was right, of course. Over the following weeks, as we haggled through lawyers and mediators, I began to see the shape of Marcus's plans. He wanted the house sold quickly. He wanted his half of our retirement accounts. He wanted to settle everything within 6 months, as if our 23 years together were a business deal that could be liquidated and closed. I fought him on everything. Not out of spite, though God knows I was angry enough for spite, but because every delay gave me time. Time to figure out my next steps. Time to find a way to keep the house that held every memory of my children's childhood. Time to grieve the life I'd thought would be mine forever. Daniel came home from college the weekend after Thanksgiving, and I told him everything. He took it like a punch to the gut, that visible flinch. The way his face closed down. The sudden maturity that settled over him like a shroud. "It's because she's young, isn't it?" he asked. "Dad's having some kind of midlife crisis." I don't know what it is," I told him honestly. "But yes, she's young." "How young?" 28. He swore, something he rarely did in my presence. "That's disgusting. She's barely older than me." Rachel's reaction was different when she came home for Christmas break. She cried, long, shuddering sobs that broke my heart, more than Marcus's betrayal had. She'd always been a daddy's girl, and the pedestal she'd placed him on had just shattered. "I don't want to see him," she said. "I don't want to meet her." I don't want anything to do with any of this. But of course, she would have to. We all would. Divorce doesn't end a family. It just reconfigures it into something sharp and painful and strange. I didn't meet Amber until February, 4 months after Marcus had moved out. He'd been living in a downtown apartment, a sleek, modern place that probably cost twice what our mortgage had been. I knew this because Rachel had reluctantly agreed to have dinner with him there, and she'd come home with descriptions that dripped with disdain. "It's all glass and chrome," she'd said. "Nothing comfortable, nothing that feels like home." And she was there, and crossed as, "What's she like?" I'd asked, hating myself for asking but unable to stop. Rachel had shrugged. "Young." She laughs at everything he says. She kept touching him. Now, standing in the parking lot of the mediator's office, I was about to see for myself. Marcus had requested that we meet to discuss the house situation one more time before our court date. Patricia had advised against it. "Never negotiate without your lawyer present," she'd warned. But I'd agreed anyway. I wanted to see them together. I needed to understand what had been worth destroying our family for. They arrived in Marcus's car, a BMW he'd bought last year. I watched as he opened the passenger door and Amber stepped out. And my first thought was that she looked like a child playing dress-up. She wore a designer suit. Probably expensive, but it hung on her slim frame in a way that emphasized her youth, rather than concealing it. Her blonde hair was styled in loose waves. Her makeup was perfect. And when she smiled at Marcus, I saw exactly what he'd seen in her. The uncomplicated adoration of someone who hadn't lived long enough to know better. "Diane," Marcus said, his voice overly formal. "Thanks for coming. This is Amber, Mrs. Richardson," Amber said, extending her hand. "It's nice to finally meet you." I didn't take her hand. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the flicker of uncertainty cross her face. Good. She should be uncertain. She should be uncomfortable. She'd helped destroy a marriage, whether she wanted to acknowledge that or not. "Let's go inside," I said. The meeting was brutal. Marcus presented his latest proposal. I would vacate the house by April 1st, giving us both time to prepare it for sale. The house would go on the market by mid-April, and we'd split the proceeds after paying off the mortgage and Patricia's fees. In exchange, he'd be generous with spousal support, $3,000 a month for 5 years, after which I'd be expected to support myself entirely. 5 years? I said. I gave up my career for 23 years to raise our children and support your practice. You've been working again for the past 5 years, Marcus countered. You're perfectly capable of being self-sufficient at part-time freelance rates that don't come close to what I'd be making if I'd stayed in the workforce. That was your choice. It was our choice. We decided together that it made sense for me to stay home. Then Amber, who had been silent until now, leaned forward. Maybe, she said carefully, there could be a compromise. What if Marcus agreed to 7 years of support instead of 5? But the house sale moved forward as planned. I stared at her. The audacity of this woman, this girl, thinking she had any right to insert herself into the dissolution of my marriage was breathtaking. I don't think you understand, I said, my voice ice. This isn't your negotiation. This is between Marcus and me. Amber's just trying to help, Marcus said, his tone defensive. She has a good head for these things. I'm sure she does. Tell me, Amber, how many divorces have you been through? She flushed. None, but then perhaps you should let the adults handle this. The meeting deteriorated from there. I left without agreeing to anything. And Patricia later told me I'd been right to walk away. But something Amber had said lingered in my mind. She had a good head for these things. Marcus had said it with pride, as if her input was valuable, as if she was a partner in his decisions. A pattern began to emerge over the next few weeks. Amber wasn't just Marcus's girlfriend. She was becoming his advisor, his confidant, his decision maker. And I began to realize that this divorce wasn't just about Marcus wanting to leave me. It was about Amber wanting to start fresh, without the encumbrance of his old life weighing them down. March arrived with unseasonable warmth, and a phone call that changed everything. "Mom?" Daniel's voice on the other end of the line was tight with anger. "I need to tell you something about Dad." I'd been grocery shopping, standing in the produce section, comparing apples, and the tone of his voice made me abandon my cart and walk outside to the parking lot. "What is it?" "Rachel and I had dinner with him last night, at his apartment. Amber was there." He paused, and I could hear him breathing heavily, as if he'd been running. "She's pregnant." The parking lot seemed to tilt. I reached out, steadying myself against a car that wasn't mine. "She's what?" "Pregnant. 3 months. They told us like it was this great news we should all celebrate. Like we're supposed to be happy that he's starting a whole new family while he's destroying ours. 3 months. The math was easy enough. She'd gotten pregnant in December, right around the time Marcus had been pushing so hard for a quick divorce settlement, right around the time he'd started insisting we needed to sell the house immediately. "Did he say anything about the house?" I asked. "Yeah, actually. He said they'd need something bigger soon, that his apartment was fine for now, but they'd want a real house before the baby came." "Mom, I think," Daniel's voice cracked, "I think he's been planning this whole thing. I think she's been planning it." After I hung up, I sat in my car for a long time, watching people come and go with their groceries, living their ordinary lives. A baby. Marcus was having a baby with a woman 23 years his junior. And suddenly everything clicked into place. The urgency to sell the house, the limited spousal support, the way Amber had been increasingly present in all the negotiations. She wanted my house. Or rather, she wanted the money from my house, so they could buy their own house, a place where they could play at being a family, where she could pretend that the life she was building hadn't been constructed on the ruins of mine. I drove home in a daze. That evening, I called Patricia. "He never told me," I said when she answered. "About the pregnancy, about any of it." "He doesn't have to," Patricia said carefully. "It doesn't change the legal situation, but it explains the pressure. The timeline. He wants this wrapped up before the baby comes, probably. But Diane, this might actually work in your favor. If we can prove he's been hiding assets or making plans that affect the settlement." "What kind of plans? Has he mentioned buying a new house? Making any large purchases?" I thought about it. Not to me. But Daniel said something about them needing something bigger. "I want you to keep your ears open. If Marcus is planning to buy a house soon after the divorce, if he's been saving money or moving assets around, that could indicate he has more resources than he's claiming, and that could change the settlement significantly." Over the next few weeks, I became a spy in my own life. I listened to every word Daniel and Rachel shared about their visits with their father. I paid attention to social media, where Amber had started posting increasingly frequent updates about exciting new chapters and building our future. I noticed Marcus had recently opened a new bank account. I only knew because a piece of his mail had been accidentally delivered to the house, and I'd opened it before realizing what it was. A picture began to emerge. Marcus wasn't struggling financially, despite his claims that his practice had been slow recently. He wasn't worried about money. He was hoarding it, moving it around, preparing for his new life with Amber and their child. And he expected me to cooperate by giving up the house, by accepting a settlement that would leave me scrambling while he moved seamlessly into his next chapter. The idea came to me in late March, during a sleepless night, when I'd been mentally inventorying everything I stood to lose. The house, obviously, but also the neighborhood I'd lived in for 15 years, the friends I'd made, the garden I'd cultivated, the proximity to my children when they visited, my entire life wrapped up in wood and brick, and the memories contained within. What if I could keep it? What if, instead of fighting Marcus in court, a battle I'd likely lose given his resources and connections, I could make him sign it over to me? The idea was absurd at first. Why would he do that? But the more I thought about it, the more I saw the angles. Marcus was desperate to move forward. Amber was even more desperate. They wanted a clean break, a quick resolution, a chance to start fresh, without the mess of a prolonged legal battle. And people who are desperate make mistakes. I called Patricia the next morning. I want to make him an offer, I said. The house for everything else. I'm not sure I follow. I keep the house, full ownership. In exchange, he gets all the retirement accounts, no spousal support, a clean break. We split the smaller assets, cars, furniture, whatever, but the big items. He takes the money, I take the house. Patricia was quiet for a moment. That's heavily weighted in his favor financially. The retirement accounts, plus no support obligation, you'd be giving up easily $300,000 or more in your favor. But I'd have the house. Diane, I understand the emotional attachment, but you need to think practically. You'll need money to maintain it, to pay the taxes, to handle repairs. Without spousal support, I'll figure it out. I'll work more. I'll take on more clients. I'll do whatever I need to do. And if he says no, he won't. I was surprised by the certainty in my voice. He wants this over with. He wants to move on to his new life without guilt or complication. If I make it easy for him, if I let him feel like he's getting the better end of the deal, he'll take it. I'll draft a proposal, Patricia said finally. But Diane, please think carefully about this. You're in a vulnerable emotional state, and I've never been more clear about anything in my life. The proposal went out the next day. Marcus's response came within 48 hours. He wanted to meet to discuss it. No lawyers, just the two of us. I agreed, suggesting we meet at the house. Our house, though it wouldn't be ours for much longer. He arrived on a Thursday evening in early April. The cherry trees in the front yard were blooming, covering the lawn in pink petals that looked like snow in the fading light. I'd spent the day cleaning, making the house look its best, though I wasn't sure why. Pride, perhaps, or the desire to remind him of what he was leaving behind. The place looks good, Marcus said as I let him in. You've always been good at this, making things beautiful. Let's not do that, I said. Let's not pretend this is a social call. We sat in the living room, the same room where we'd celebrated countless Christmases, where we'd watched our children grow, where we'd planned our future together. It felt like sitting in a museum of our own history. Your offer, Marcus said, pulling out a copy of the proposal Patricia had sent. It's interesting. It's fair. More than fair. Actually, for you, maybe. I'm giving up a lot. You're getting liquid assets, money you can use immediately. No spousal support means no ongoing obligations. It's exactly what you want. He studied me, and I saw the calculation in his eyes. Why are you really doing this, Diane? This house means so much to you that you'd give up $300,000? That you'd give up financial security? This house is my home, I said simply. It's where I raised our children. It's where I've built my life. You get to start over with Amber, with your new baby, with your clean slate. This is my clean slate. This is how I move forward. I watched him process this, saw the moment when he decided to believe me, because it was what he wanted to believe. It made him the good guy, generous husband, giving his ex-wife the house she loved so much. It made his departure slightly less monstrous. I'll need to talk to Amber, he said. Of course. I kept my voice neutral, though the words tasted like poison. It affects her too. She's been very supportive through all of this, very understanding. I didn't respond. What could I say? That his pregnant mistress had no right to be part of these decisions? That her understanding came from getting exactly what she wanted? I swallowed all of it and smiled. Just let me know, I said. 3 days later, Marcus called. They'd agreed. We could move forward with the settlement as proposed. Patricia drew up the papers within a week, and we scheduled a signing for the last Friday in April. The day arrived with gray skies and a steady rain that matched my mood perfectly. I arrived at Patricia's office early, dressed carefully in a navy suit I'd worn to my daughter's high school graduation. Armor for battle. Though the battle should have been over. Marcus and Amber arrived together, of course. She was showing now, a small bump visible beneath her dress that made my stomach clench. She'd won. She'd taken my husband, my future, and now she'd be living the life I should have had, the young family, the second chance, the clean narrative with no messy history to complicate it. We gathered in Patricia's conference room. Gerald Hoffman was there for Marcus, along with a notary who would make everything legal and binding. Patricia walked us through the documents one by one. This is the final decree, she said, placing the first document in front of Marcus and me. It outlines the terms of the settlement. Mrs. Richardson receives sole ownership of the marital home at 42 Maple Street. Mr. Richardson receives the entirety of the marital retirement accounts, totaling approximately $423,000, with no obligation for spousal support. The remaining assets have been divided as previously agreed. I signed my name. Marcus signed his. The notary witnessed and stamped. Next, Patricia continued, we have the quitclaim deed. This transfers Mr. Richardson's interest in the property at 42 Maple Street entirely to Mrs. Richardson. She placed the deed in front of Marcus. This was it, the moment when the house would become mine alone. I held my breath, waiting for him to sign, to make it official. Marcus picked up the pen, then paused. You have a pen? He asked Amber. This one's out of ink. Use mine, she said, pulling a pen from her purse, one of those expensive fountain pens that cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget. She handed it to him with a smile. What happened next occurred so quickly that I almost missed it. Marcus signed his name on the quitclaim deed. Then Amber, leaning over his shoulder, reached out and placed her hand over his, guiding the pen. And here, she said, pointing to a second line. For the joint property filing, Marcus signed again, this time on a line that wasn't marked for his signature, a line that was marked for mine. I opened my mouth to object, but Patricia was faster. Her hand shot out, covering the document. That signature is invalid, she said sharply. Mrs. Richardson, did you authorize anyone to sign on your behalf? No, I said, my voice shaking. What just happened? Patricia pulled the document toward her. Examining it closely, Gerald Hoffman had gone pale. The notary was frowning, pen poised above her stamp. This, Patricia said, her voice deadly calm, appears to be an attempt to forge Mrs. Richardson's signature on the quitclaim deed, which would make the transfer invalid and would constitute fraud. The room went silent, except for the rain against the windows. Amber stood up, her face flushed. That's not I. Was just helping him see where to sign. He missed a line. He didn't miss a line, Patricia said. There is no second line for him to sign. The only other signature line on this document is for Mrs. Richardson, and you just guided him to sign her name. That's ridiculous. Marcus, tell them. But Marcus was staring at the document, the color draining from his face. He looked at the pen still in his hand, then at Amber, then at me. Amber, he said quietly. What did you do? I didn't. She stopped, seeming to realize that everyone in the room was looking at her. It was a mistake. I got confused. There are so many papers. You got confused about whose name to sign? Patricia's voice could have cut glass. You got confused about what constitutes fraud? Gerald, Marcus said, turning to his lawyer. What does this mean? Gerald Hoffman closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, he looked at his client with something like pity. It means, he said carefully, that you've just attempted to forge your wife's signature on a legal document, with multiple witnesses present, including a notary. I didn't attempt anything. Amber guided your hand to sign a name that wasn't yours on a line you had no authority to sign. Gerald gathered the papers in front of him. This meeting is over. Marcus, I strongly advise you not to say anything else right now. And you, he looked at Amber, should probably consult with your own attorney. They left. Marcus looked shell-shocked. Amber defiant and frightened in equal measure. The notary packed up her materials without stamping anything, and I sat there, trying to process what had just happened. She tried to steal the house, I said finally. She tried to sign my name. Yes, Patricia agreed. She did. The question now is why. The answer came in pieces over the following weeks, like a puzzle assembling itself against my will. First came the revelation about the pre-approval. Marcus and Amber had been pre-approved for a mortgage on a new house, a house in an upscale suburb, with 5 bedrooms and a 3-car garage. The pre-approval had come through in February, before Marcus had even finalized the terms of our divorce settlement. How did I learn this? Daniel, who'd finally gotten fed up with his father's behavior, had done some snooping of his own. He'd found documents in Marcus's apartment during a visit, documents that outlined financial projections, mortgage applications, and a folder labeled New House Planning, with printouts of properties they'd been considering. They were spending your money before you'd even agreed to give it to them, Daniel told me, his voice tight with anger. The whole thing was planned out. They were just waiting for you to sign. But that didn't explain why Amber had tried to forge my signature. If they'd followed through with the settlement as agreed, Marcus would have had his money, and they could have bought whatever house they wanted. The forgery seemed like an unnecessary risk unless the second piece came from Patricia, who'd been doing some investigating of her own. The house on Maple Street, she told me during a meeting in her office, is worth more than we initially thought. A lot more. I had it reappraised after what happened. And with the recent market surge and the improvements you've made, it's now worth about 1.2 million. 1.2 million, almost $500,000 more than our original estimate. Marcus knew, I said slowly. He must have known. I think he did. And I think Amber figured out that if they could get the house in their names somehow, if they could make it look like you'd voluntarily transferred your interest to them, they could turn around and sell it for a significant profit, much more than he was getting from the retirement accounts. But the settlement was already giving him those accounts. Why risk fraud for more? Why? Patricia leaned back in her chair. Because it wasn't enough. Not for the life Amber wants. I've done some research on her, Diane. Her social media is full of expensive tastes. Designer clothes, exotic vacations, luxury cars. She's been living beyond her means for years, maxing out credit cards, taking out loans. She sees Marcus as her ticket to the lifestyle she thinks she deserves. And when she realized the house was worth more than she thought, she couldn't resist trying to grab it. So, what happens now? Now, you have options. You can press charges for attempted fraud. You can use this as leverage to renegotiate the settlement entirely. Or you can proceed with a modified version of your original plan, but with much stricter legal protections and oversight. I thought about it for 3 days. I thought about revenge, about making them pay for what they'd tried to do. I thought about Rachel's face when I told her what her father had been part of. I thought about standing in a courtroom, airing all the ugly details of my marriage's end in front of strangers. In the end, I chose something different. I called Marcus myself, without lawyers as intermediaries. He agreed to meet me at a coffee shop downtown Neutral Territory, far from both his apartment and my house. He looked terrible, older somehow, as if the last few weeks had aged him years. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his suit looked slept in. She said it was a mistake, were his first words to me. That she got confused, that she didn't mean to. Stop, I said. Just stop. We both know that's not true. He deflated, shoulders slumping. I didn't know she was going to do that. I swear, Diane, I would never have. But you were planning to profit from it, weren't you? You knew the house was worth more than you'd told me. You'd already been approved for a mortgage on a new place. You were spending money I hadn't even agreed to give you yet. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? He was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee. She's young, he said finally. She has all these ideas about how life should be. The perfect house, the perfect family, the perfect life. And I wanted to give her that. I wanted to be the man who could give her everything she wanted. Even if it meant stealing from me, I wasn't stealing. I was just moving things around, making plans. I didn't know she would try something so stupid. I looked at this man I'd spent more than 2 decades with and felt a strange sort of clarity. He wasn't a monster. He was just weak and vain, and desperate to be the hero in a younger woman's story, even if it meant being the villain in mine. Here's what's going to happen, I said. We're going to draw up a new settlement. I keep the house, free and clear. You keep the retirement accounts, and you're going to pay me spousal support, $5,000 a month for 10 years as compensation for the attempt to defraud me. 5,000 for 10 years? Diane, that's what it costs to make this go away. Because the alternative is, I press charges. I file a criminal complaint for attempted fraud. I make sure every lawyer in this city knows what you and your girlfriend tried to pull. How do you think that will affect your practice? His face went white. You wouldn't. Try me. You've taken everything else from me, Marcus. Don't think I won't take your reputation if that's all I have left to strike back with. It wasn't a bluff. In that moment, I meant every word, and he could see it in my eyes. If I agree, he said slowly, it stays between us? No criminal charges? No publicity? If you agree, and if Amber stays away from me, from our children, from anything to do with this settlement, then yes, it stays between us. He signed the new agreement 3 days later. Patricia made sure every I was dotted, every T crossed. There would be no ambiguity this time, no room for creative interpretation. The house was mine. The money would come monthly for the next 10 years, and Marcus would move on to his new life with significantly less capital than he'd planned for. The house changed after that. It was still the same building, the same rooms, the same garden blooming outside. But it felt different now. It was wholly mine in a way it had never been before. Even when Marcus and I had been happy, I painted the bedroom first, covered his preferred neutral beige with a soft sage green I'd always loved. I rearranged furniture, got rid of pieces that reminded me too much of our old life, brought in new things that reflected only my taste. I took up the carpet in the hallway and refinished the hardwood underneath, revealing beautiful oak that had been hidden for years. Rachel came home for the summer and helped me turn Marcus's old office into a proper studio for my design work. We painted the walls white, installed better lighting, brought in a new desk and ergonomic chair. I started taking on more clients, building my business into something that could support me without relying on Marcus's checks. Daniel visited often, sometimes bringing friends from college. The house filled with laughter again, with the sounds of life being lived. I heard through the grapevine that Marcus and Amber had bought a house. After all, a modest 3-bedroom in a less prestigious neighborhood than they'd planned. The baby was born in July, a boy they named Cole. Marcus sent me a text announcing the birth. As if I would care, as if this child had anything to do with me. I didn't respond. Amber tried to friend me on social media once, in what I can only assume was either a guilt-driven impulse or an attempt to show off her new life. I blocked her without a second thought. The first spousal support check arrived on schedule. So did the second, and the third, and all the ones after that. I deposited them without ceremony, watching my savings account grow, building a cushion against uncertainty. Security I'd earned through 23 years of marriage and one woman's greed. A year after the divorce was finalized, I was working in my garden on a warm September morning when my phone rang. It was Patricia. I thought you'd want to know, she said. Marcus's firm just issued a press release. He's stepping down as partner. I sat back on my heels, trowel in hand. Officially? He's pursuing other opportunities? Unofficially? Word is there were some financial irregularities. Nothing criminal, but enough to make the other partners nervous. They offered him the option to leave quietly. I thought about the mortgage he was carrying, the child support for a new baby, the spousal support payments to me, the lifestyle Amber expected him to maintain. I thought about the pressure of trying to be everything to everyone while your foundation crumbled beneath you. That's his problem now, I said, not mine. No, Patricia agreed. Not yours. How are you doing? I looked around my garden at the roses I'd pruned back last fall, that were now blooming magnificently, at the vegetable patch, producing more tomatoes than I could eat, at the house behind me, with its fresh paint and new shutters. I'm doing well, I said, and realized it was true. Really well. After we hung up, I went back to my weeding. The rhythmic work was meditative, satisfying in its simplicity. Pull out what doesn't belong, make room for what does. It was a metaphor almost too obvious to acknowledge, but that didn't make it less true. My phone buzzed again an hour later. A text from Rachel. Dad called. He and Amber are having problems. He wanted to know if we could talk. I told him to work it out himself. Was that okay? I smiled. More than okay. Proud of you. She sent back a heart emoji. That evening, I had dinner with my neighbor, Margaret, a widow in her 70s, who'd been living on the street longer than anyone. We sat on her back patio, sharing a bottle of wine and watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. You've done well with that house, Margaret said. It looks better than it has in years. Thank you. It's been a labor of love. I remember when you and Marcus first moved in. You were so young, so in love. I used to watch you two working in the yard together and think, there's a couple who'll make it. She shook her head. Shows what I know. You weren't wrong, I said. We did make it, for a long time, just not forever. Is there such a thing as forever anymore? I don't know. But I think maybe forever isn't the right goal anyway. Maybe the goal is just to build something good while you can, and then to survive when it ends. To find a way to keep going. Margaret raised her glass. To survival, then, and to second acts. We clinked glasses as the last of the daylight faded. 6 months later, on a cold March morning, I found a letter in my mailbox. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. Amber. I almost threw it away, unopened. What could she possibly have to say to me? But curiosity won out. I carried it inside, made myself tea, and sat at my kitchen table before carefully opening the envelope. Dear Diane, I don't expect you to read this, and I certainly don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed to write it anyway, if only to get the words out of my head. I'm leaving Marcus. I'm taking Cole and moving back to Ohio to be near my family. The divorce will be final in a few months. You were right about everything. About me. About him. About what I thought I wanted. I convinced myself that love and money and a beautiful house would be enough to make me happy. I convinced myself that what I did, helping to break up your marriage, was justified because we were meant to be together, or some other romantic nonsense I told myself. The truth is, I was 28 years old and stupid. I thought older meant stable, that a successful man with a established life would somehow fix all the broken parts of mine. I thought stealing someone else's happiness would make me happy. It didn't. Marcus isn't the man I thought he was. Or maybe he is, and I just wasn't paying attention. He's controlling and paranoid about money. He resents Cole for crying at night, for needing things, for being a baby. He blames me for the problems with his firm, for the fact that we couldn't afford the house I wanted, for the fact that his children barely speak to him anymore. But mostly, I think he misses you. Not in a romantic way. I don't think he's capable of that kind of self-reflection. But he misses the life you built together, the comfort of it, the ease of being with someone who knew him when he was young, who'd built a history with him. I can't give him that. I'm 29 now, with a 1-year-old, and no career to speak of, because I spent the last few years being a supportive partner to a man who's falling apart. I'm exactly where you would have been if you'd given up the house, except I have no settlement, no safety net, no 23 years of contributions to fall back on. I know what I tried to do with your signature. I know how close I came to committing a crime that could have sent me to jail. I tell myself I got confused, that I made a mistake. But we both know that's a lie. I wanted that house. I wanted everything you had, and I was willing to steal it. I'm writing this because I need you to know that you won. Not just legally, not just financially, but in every way that matters. You kept your home, your dignity, and your self-respect. You rebuilt your life on your own terms. I have none of those things. I don't expect sympathy. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that karma is real, and that sometimes the punishment for taking what isn't yours is getting exactly what you asked for. I'm sorry for all of it, Amber. I read the letter 3 times, feeling a complicated mix of emotions I couldn't quite name. Satisfaction, yes. Vindication, certainly. But also something uncomfortably close to pity. She was right, she'd gotten exactly what she asked for. And now, she was learning what I'd known all along. That a relationship built on betrayal has shaky foundations. That stealing someone's life doesn't make it yours. That shortcuts rarely lead anywhere worth going. I folded the letter carefully and put it in a drawer. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Not of her, but of me. Of what I'd survived. What I'd fought for. What I'd won. Then I went back to my computer, where I had a design project due by the end of the week for a client paying me more than I'd ever made in a single job. My business was thriving. My children were healthy and successful, and still spoke to me regularly. My house was mine, fully and completely. Amber was wrong about one thing, though. I hadn't won because she'd lost. I'd won because I'd refused to lose myself in the process. Because I'd fought for what mattered and let go of what didn't. Because I'd survived betrayal and come out the other side still whole. That wasn't victory over her. It was victory over circumstance, over pain, over the version of myself that could have been destroyed by all of this. I never wrote back. The for sale sign went up 3 houses down on a Tuesday afternoon in May. I was outside planting annuals in the front beds when the real estate agent hammered it into the lawn. Just another house in the neighborhood changing hands. Another family's story ending or beginning. I thought nothing of it until Margaret called me that evening. "You'll never believe who's selling," she said, her voice rich with gossip. "The Hendersons. And you'll never believe why." Why? Sandra ran into Karen Henderson at the grocery store. Apparently, they're downsizing, moving to a condo downtown because their house is too much to maintain now that it's just the 2 of them. I made appropriate, sympathetic noises, but I wasn't sure why Margaret thought I'd find this particularly interesting. "The thing is," Margaret continued, "it's worth at least—" I could imagine, actually. I was living it. After we hung up, I walked through my house, really looking at it for the first time in months. The refinished floors that gleamed in the evening light. The kitchen I'd remodeled last year with the money from a particularly lucrative design contract. The garden visible through every window, mature and beautiful. The bedrooms where my children still stayed when they visited. Though those visits were less frequent now as they built their own lives. This house had been my battleground. It had been the prize I'd fought for, the symbol of everything I refused to give up. But somewhere along the way, it had become simply my home again. Not a trophy, not a victory, just the place where I lived my life. My phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. "Hey, Mom. Bringing someone home for dinner Sunday. Someone special. That okay?" I smiled. "Can't wait." From Rachel. Got the job. Starting in September. Thank you for believing in me. Life. Moving forward. Not the life I'd planned 25 years ago when I married Marcus, full of hope and certainty. Not the life I'd imagined even 5 years ago when everything felt stable and secure. But a good life nonetheless. One I'd built myself from the rubble of what came before. I never heard from Amber again. Through mutual acquaintances and the occasional internet search, I couldn't resist. I learned she'd remarried someone age-appropriate this time, someone from her hometown. She'd gone back to school, finished a degree. She was, by all accounts, doing fine. Marcus had started his own practice after leaving the firm. It was smaller, less prestigious, but sustainable. He saw Cole every other weekend. He'd asked Rachel and Daniel if they'd consider family therapy with him. He'd sent me a message on the 2nd anniversary of our divorce. Just 2 words. I'm sorry. I'd read it, acknowledged it with a brief thank you, and moved on, because that's what I'd learned through all of this, how to move on. Not to forget, not to pretend it never happened, but to integrate the pain into my story and keep walking forward anyway. The house on Maple Street wasn't just worth $1.2 million anymore. With the improvements I'd made and the continued market growth, it was probably worth closer to 1.4. I'd had it appraised recently, not because I was planning to sell, but because I'd needed the information for some financial planning. I could sell it if I wanted to, take the money, and buy something smaller, bank the difference, travel the world. I could rent it out and live somewhere else. I had options now. In a way, I hadn't 2 years ago, but every time I considered it, I came back to the same conclusion. I wasn't ready to leave. Maybe I never would be. This house was more than an investment or an asset on a balance sheet. It was the place where I'd raised my children, where I'd learned who I was when everything else was stripped away, where I'd discovered I was stronger than I thought. It was the place where I'd won not by taking anything from anyone else, but by refusing to let anyone take what was mine. On Sunday, I cleaned the house in preparation for Daniel's visit. I made his favorite dinner pot roast with roasted vegetables, the same meal I'd been making for him since he was 10. I set the table with the good dishes, put fresh flowers in a vase, opened the windows to let in the spring air. When he arrived with his girlfriend, a lovely woman named Sophia, who made him laugh and looked at him the way I remembered looking at Marcus. Once I welcomed them both with hugs. We ate dinner, told stories, laughed at old jokes. Sophia fit seamlessly into the conversation, asking questions about family photos on the walls, admiring the house. Your home is beautiful, she told me as I was clearing plates. You can tell so much love went into it. Thank you, I said. It's been a labor of love, that's for sure. After they left, I stood in my living room, in the quiet house, alone, but not lonely. The years stretched ahead of me. Years I'd fill with work and friendships, and maybe, eventually, romance again if I wanted it. Years in this house or somewhere else, years shaped by my choices rather than someone else's betrayals. Marcus had left me for a younger woman. That younger woman had tried to steal my house, my security, my future, and in trying to take everything, she'd given me something neither of them could have anticipated. She'd given me myself back. The settlement check that month went into my savings account like all the others. $5,000 that would arrive every month for 8 more years. Money that Marcus earned, and Amber had once planned to spend. Money that was mine now, compensation for what they'd tried to take. But the house, this beautiful, imperfect, hard-won house, that was mine for a different reason, not because a judge awarded it, or because a settlement demanded it, but because I'd fought for it. Because when they'd tried to sign my name to papers that would have given them everything, I'd said no. Because when they'd tried to write the ending to my story, I'd picked up the pen and finished it myself. And that, I thought as I turned off the lights and headed upstairs to bed, was worth more than any house, any settlement, any victory could ever be.